Hey, welcome to Here's One I Made Earlier, Monster of the Day Mask Making with Billy Blouse at EGX Digital 2020. Today we're going to go through the steps that it takes to make Monster of the Day masks for casual critter cosplay. And I have more than a few of these. I like to work in felt and cardboard to make these simple 2D masks. But you can use craft foam or paper or anything you like, really. You can use other fabrics, you can use leather, you can use vinyl, you can really take the basic core techniques and apply them to a whole variety of different things. I just don't have time in this workshop to take you through them all. So I'm going to show you some of the masks I made earlier. So first of all, I really cannot resist a dungeon crawling slime. They are possibly my favourite monster of the day of all time. This is what I made a wee while ago, and I like to call it the jam flan. Don't know if it's strawberry or raspberry, depends on my mood and who asks what I say, but it's red. I made this out of layers of, as you can possibly see on the back, completely random pieces of felt that really, they were just what I had lying about, and the shape of them, the size of the pieces, kind of dictated the size and shape of the mask a little bit. I free-handed this mask rather than following the steps that I'm going to outline for you. And it took me maybe an hour or two to make. I rushed this one. But these are just a bit of fun, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And the way I made this was I layered several different layers of fabric paint. So I started with like a plain red base, then I used a chunky layer of glitter, then I used a thinner layer of glitter, and then I let them dry in between layers. Then I drew directly with puffy paint. Lots of these bits, the green and white bits, all go in the dark. The black and red outline bits don't. And yep, that's my jam flan. I made another dungeon crawling slime because I think it is my goal in life to have these in every colour available. Which, when I'm taking you through the steps, this is one of my examples. I decided this was a lemon curd custard tart with a grape jelly filling, because I just felt like being yellow and purple. This one is made out of cardboard, elastic, googly eyes, acrylic paint, glitter glue, permanent markers, that's the word I'm looking for, and I made the tongue using kind of fabric puffy paint, which you can use acrylic paint on fabric if you have a fabric medium mixed in with it. Fabric paint, the puffy paint, you can use on cardboard and it not be a problem. I also used googly eyes because I love the noise they make when they shake. They're just pleasing. Because I painted these rather than leaving them raw like on my shark, which I'll get to in a minute, I used a nail file just to kind of prime it, just to make the surface ready to accept the paint. Best practice is using sandpaper, but if you don't have sandpaper, then a nail file or emery board will work just fine on something small like this. It would probably drive you to distraction if you were trying to do that on a bigger surface, but for small details and small pieces, it works just fine. I painted it with non-toxic water-based paint that still adheres to plastic. But you could use nail polish, that would be fine. If you're using any toxic paints or strong glues like super glue, make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area, wear a mask, wear gloves, protect yourself. But we'll go through that, our health and safety talk later. And then, yeah, just detailed with glitter glue. And since I was talking about the cardboard and the shark a little bit, we'll lead on to this. So this is made in pretty much the same way as the lemon jelly. It's just layers of card with elastic stapled to it, and the elastic is sandwiched in between the layers. It is painted with acrylic paint and then detailed with permanent marker, glitter glue, and some googly eyes. I also made, because it's a shark fin that I put on an elasticated belt, which is made in the same way, which is just sandwiched, wedged 4 pieces of cardboard, painted with grey acrylic paint, which I mixed, then the permanent marker outline, because I love stuff to be bold and cartoony and fun and a little bit pop art, but if you wanted to go more realistic, you absolutely could. And then, yeah, some glitter glue just to make it sparkle. Because if I can make it glitter, I will. But you don't have to. It's all up to personal preference. But I just love a bit of sparkle. Speaking of animals and a bit of sparkle, we move on to our next 2 masks. So I made a swan because I just wanted to make a swan. There's no other reason. I was teaching one of my friends to make a mask, and we just decided to make birds. And this is made in the way of just cutting out shapes of felt in the right colours, sticking them together with the elastic sewn in between 2 layers, just hand sewn, stitched, and then the layers are glued together. And then I just decorated it with some puffy paint, with a bit of glitter and a bit of glow, because that's my jam. No, that's my jam. And that's my jelly. I love a pun also. But because we're at EGX Digital, I wanted to relate what I was making back to video games. Dungeon crawling slime? Easy. The other thing that I really can't resist is a good video game status effect. So I decided I just quite fancied being a frog or a toad. You can decide which one this is. And I made this sort of somewhere in between how the jam flan and the swan worked. I made layers of different coloured felt in the colours that I wanted, or the base colours that I wanted. Then I used fabric paint mixed with glitter on top. Then I detailed with more fabric paint carefully painted on to make my really glittery frog. Sometimes I put the eye holes where the eyes are, like on the jam flan and on the swan. Sometimes it's in the nostrils, like with my status effect frog toad. And sometimes I like to put it in the mouth, so that your wee eyes are just peeking out of the mouth, and it's funny. So a good tip for any time your eye holes are quite large and you're going to be able to see kind of around your eyes, especially if you've put it in the mouth, is to just use face paint or use eyeshadow, depending on what you tolerate, what you may or may not be allergic to. I'm allergic to face paint, so I use eyeshadow for everything. With the shark, I would use red because the inside of its mouth is red. With the with my jelly, I would use either a deep kind of gold or purple to match kind of the tongue and the eyes, or the deep gold to be kind of like a depth of inside the jelly. There would probably be glitter involved. With things like the irises in the eyes and the nostrils, I might, because I'm very, very pale, I might use a kind of like a smoky eye effect, use the kind of like dark natural tones around my eyes, or use black, just being very careful with it. Or you could paint the eyeballs onto your eyelids and close your eyes for photos. Now, be careful with that walking around, but you could do that, and that would be absolutely awesome. Or you can just use your own eyes and not bother about that. It really depends on what you want to do. And whether you want to wander around with like a big purple mask painted on your face or not. Just do what feels right, do what feels comfortable for you. You don't need to wear makeup with these. The whole point of these is that it's casual, it's comfortable. You only do what you want. You don't have to wear makeup. So before you begin, the first step is choose what you're going to make. So I decided to take you through my two kind of 2D techniques of using felt and using cardboard. And I made my frog toad status effect and my yellow slime. The others were masks that I'd made earlier. I looked up the reference images on my phone because these were very simple things that I was going to be easy to translate. If you're making something more complicated or you don't have a smartphone, then use a computer, whether that's in the library when it is safe and you're able to, at your school, whether it's the family computer. Just be careful what you look up on that. Whether it's your laptop, whether it's on a tablet, get the reference images. You can also work from physical media. It doesn't have to be digital. So you can use a figurine of the character or critter that you want to make. You can use the actual comic book that you're working from, just anything like that. Keep it carefully away from your art supplies and work in a clean space with it when you're working with it. You can use video game box art. Whatever you have to hand that you want to work from that has your character on it. Then you want to usually when I'm making these I want to simplify whatever I'm making down a bit, but if you were wanting to make it really, really detailed and accurate, then do that. It's totally up to you. So what you need are, first of all, to prepare your workspace. So where are you working? I tend to work on, if the project's small enough, an old TV tray table thing that I spilled nail polish on, and then I was like, well, I've wrecked it. I can do what I want with this surface now. I paint on it. It's covered in paint and glitter glue and actual glue and whatever else. But you might get in trouble from your landlord, housemates, or parents or partner if you muck up any of the nice communal spaces. If you're working on your kitchen table, if you're working on a desk in your office or bedroom, if you're working on this in an after-school club, if you're at your friend's house in a socially distanced way that's following the rules for your area, wherever you are, protect your surfaces. So make sure they're clean first. Put down old newspaper, put down a roll of paper, put down an old bedsheet, old towels, get a tarp and lay it out. That sounds like you're about to do something dangerous, but you're not. Just protect your surfaces, put something down that will stop any spillages, leakages, or over-enthusiastic painting from getting on anything you want to keep clean. The next thing to set up your workspace and prepare for your project is you want to protect your clothes. So whether that's investing in some coveralls or overalls, whether that's wearing like an old shirt, like an old school shirt or an old work shirt, especially if you can beg, steal or borrow one off of a partner or parent, older sibling or friend who's bigger than you, then it'll cover more of you. I used to use my dad's old work shirts. I don't do that anymore, but they used to be great. Or you can wear old clothes that you don't mind getting a bit mucky, or get an apron, or especially for the job, or just a general apron that you know it's okay to get paint and stuff on. Mine says, let's cosplay with Billy Blouse in lovely primary colours in a speech bubble. And it's not just an apron, it's a gapron, because the pocket has the new Pride flag on it. Because I'm proud, and I don't care who knows. You've protected your surfaces, you've protected your clothing. Now you want to protect yourself. If you are working with any potentially hazardous or toxic art supplies, make sure you have the proper safety equipment. Always read the instructions on whatever you're working with. So especially if you're using super glue or oil-based paints, anything like that, make sure you are working in a well-ventilated environment. So have your window open. If you're lucky enough to have a studio space with an extractor fan, or if you're working at the kitchen table and you have a cooker hood with an extractor on it, whack that on. Or, if the weather's nice enough, work outside. But whatever you do, just make sure your space is well ventilated and stay safe. If you're working with anything that might cause breathing problems, particularly any adhesives like E5000, wear the proper respirator mask. You should have a mask at the moment anyway, but it might not be the kind that you need for your project. Always check. So if you're sanding things, wear a dust mask. If you're working with spray paints, wear a spray paint mask. Just keep yourself safe and protected. Your hands, if you're working with anything that you might have an allergy to, or if you need to keep your hands clean and professional for your work or for school or college or whatever, wear vinyl, latex or latex-free gloves. Just protect your hands, protect your lungs, protect your face. You might need to wear eye protectors depending on what you're working with. Probably for these projects you won't. That's more working with kind of power tools and welding. But if it says you need an eye protector or a face shield on the safety instructions, do it. Don't cut corners. Keep yourself safe and well. So in order to stay safe, stay home, and craft masks. Just protect your surfaces, protect yourself, wash your hands regularly between everything that you're doing. Just take some extra precautions right now, more than you normally would, but just look after yourself, look after your surfaces, look after your clothes. just do a bit of preparation before you start. Now I'm going to go through what we need step by step to make these masks. So after you've figured out what critter you're going to make, you want to print out, if you have access to a printer, or draw using whatever drawing tools you need, whether that's for precision, you might need a compass or a ruler or a set square or whatever you want to use. You might just want to freehand it. I tend to just freehand it, or you might want to print it out and then trace the shapes that you want. You want to kind of simplify the patterns down into reasonably big shapes that you can cut out of card or felt or whatever craft foam, whatever material you're using. So you need some paper. That can be printer paper, that can be scrap paper. If you're making a bigger mask, like for instance the shark kind of size, but more complicated than just needing to have the nose shape on it, then you can tape bits of paper together to make that shape work. You're going to need to cut out all of your pattern pieces. So you need paper, drawing tools. I just used a biro pen, but you can use a pencil and then have an eraser to rub out any mistakes or anything that you're doing when you're going to the drafting stage. Transferring it onto your material. Once you're happy with your design, cut it out. You might even need to cut out different stages using craft scissors or paper scissors, and then take it onto another sheet of paper and draw it out, draw round bits, add more bits on, make a guide, whatever it is that you need to do. Okay, and then you want to transfer that design to your material, whether that's your felt, your card, craft foam, paper, like thicker paper, whatever you're using. So you need whatever your material is in the amount that you need to cut out the pattern that you've made. You want to hold it down, you can pin it down, or you can just hold it in place and you draw it around it with either the same drawing tool you used, a pencil or a pen, or you might need to use a marker, or particularly if you're working with felt, then it's good to use kind of tailor's chalk or something like that will wipe off more easily. Once you have drawn round whatever your pattern shape is, you want to cut that out with the appropriate cutting tool for the job. So if you're working with thin card, paper, or craft foam, then you probably just need craft or paper scissors. If you're working with fabric, you need fabric scissors or a cutting mat and a rotary cutter. If you're working with thick cardboard or thick foam, then you will probably need a cutting mat and a craft or Stanley knife. If you're using any of these sharp objects and you need adult supervision to do that or a helper just in case, make sure they are there when you're doing it, because we just want to keep safe. And if you are cutting with a blade, you want to cut away from your body rather than towards it, because if you have a little muscle spasm or anything, then you can really hurt yourself. And just be very aware of where your hands are while you are cutting. My body won't do best practice. There's something going wrong in my shoulder that means when I try to cut away from my body, it actually causes my functional dystonia to trigger and create really dangerous muscle spasms that if I was wielding a blade, I would very, very, very definitely hurt myself. So sometimes you have to adapt, and best practice doesn't always work for your body, but just be as careful as you can, and especially if you can't do the safest way, make sure somebody is with you, or at least in the other room, so that you can get help as quickly as possible. I tend to turn the card more often, go slowly, cut, instead of trying to cut through in a oneer, cut through a little bit at a time and just turn the card in or foam in smaller increments. And I try to cut kind of away from my body but behind me. That is not best practice, that is not what I advise you do, but it is more dangerous for me to try to cut away from my body than it is to try and cut across and around. Just because of the way my shoulder joint moves from repeated injuries from subluxations and dislocations over the years. Fun with disability. So just adapt and make it work for you. You might need to use a really specific kind of scissors. If you're left-handed, get left-handed scissors. It will make a big difference to your ability to do these things. So if you're left-handed and you've been doing kind of crafting projects and you just think, oh, I can't do it, I always make a mess of it, are you using right-handed scissors? Like, this seems really obvious, but I'm ambidextrous, and the difference it makes on days when my brain is trying to channel everything through the left hand instead of the right hand, which is what I've learned to use because that's what the world's mainly built around, it really does make a difference. I mean, most left-handed folks will already know this, but it's just, particularly if you're working with a child and you are not left-handed yourself, you might not think about these things. So, just something to bear in mind. Using a proper tool for the job. Adapting tools. Using like thermoplastics and things to make custom grips, particularly for craft knives and scissors and things, can make a bigger difference than you realise. So use the right tool for the job, but it has to be the right tool for you for the job. And it might not be the same tool that's right for me, it might not be the same tool that's right for anyone else you've learned a tutorial from. Everybody has their own quirks and adaptions. Use the ones that work best for you. So the next stage, once you have cut your pattern out, is to use whatever your fastening is. So for me, my preference is elastic. That's what I like to use because I find tying things quite difficult, particularly behind my head. I also quite like that I can pull it in a knot and put it around my ponytail or my bun just to give it extra security when it's on my head. But you can absolutely use 2 pieces of ribbon and attach them together with a press or popper studs or some Velcro, or just tie it into a really lovely bow behind your head and make that part of the design. You can use string, whatever you have, it's absolutely fine. It is completely up to you. My preference is elastic, your preference might be ribbon, with or without sew-on press studs. It doesn't matter. Or, yeah, a button and a buttonhole. Anything like that. You can even just get 2 bits of ribbon and safety pin them together. That is totally fine too. Or be a little bit more swanky and sew a brooch back on it. Whatever works for you. I have dexterity problems, so anything I can just like whack on, pull on and off is much, much easier for me. Even trying to fiddle with Velcro or press studs behind my head is kind of a no-go. But again, adapt it to what works for you and what you prefer. I don't even really like the tie on my apron. It's a right gidder to get undone. I might need to rethink that. But do whatever works for you. When you're working with card, paper and foam, you can just staple it on. So you want to take whichever your back piece is and staple kind of like lengthwise as much as you humanly possible can, getting around whatever the shapes are with your stapler, and staple it on, and then you're going to be sandwiching it in between 2 layers to kind of keep them in. I prefer, if possible, to have the long flat bits on the outside that's going to be against your head. You can also like put a piece of felt or leather or faux leather or cork or something like that on, or you can wedge it in between 3 layers of card or foam if you want, just to make it extra secure. You can also hand sew onto a bit of felt and then glue that felt onto the cardboard and then sandwich it. If you're working with felt or other fabric, then you're just going to want to hand sew it on to whatever the back base is, and you're going to sandwich it in between. You want to leave 1/2 inch, sort of 1 or 2 centimetres of the end of your fastener, whether it's elastic, ribbon or string. You're going to want to leave that much on the inside the surface that you're going to attach it to. And then once you've attached one side, carefully holding onto it, pull it round and loop it over so that it's not getting twisted or turned over, and that the same side is flat on both sides. And do the same again, just hand sew it on, staple it on, whatever you're doing. If you're hand sewing it, then obviously you're going to need a needle, thread, and some embroidery scissors or snips. You're also going to need embroidery scissors, snips, or your fabric scissors to cut the elastic. Craft scissors probably are just going to get a bit stuck, but try and keep like craft and paper scissors to using craft paper and foam, and like try and keep your fabric scissors as fabric scissors, because it makes a big difference how sharp the scissors are, and using them on card, paper and foam blunts them. It makes it very difficult to cut the fabric. Once you've got your elastic attached, or your ribbon, whatever you're using, I'm just going to keep calling it elastic because that's what I used. Once you've got that attached, you then want to line up your 2 kind of like sandwich base layers, whatever they are. Apply glue, and you can use, if you're using craft foam, then probably super glue or similar is probably a good bet, but work in a well ventilated area. But wood glue would still work with that. It would just take longer to dry. If you're working with paper or card, you can use PVA glue or wood glue. You can use super glue as well, but I prefer to work with non-toxic glue as much as humanly possible. And I just happen to have a big tub of wood glue, so that's what I used. When you're working with felt and other fabrics, use fabric glue. I really like Mod Podge, but you don't have to use that. You can use whatever fabric glue you want. I just think that it's really, really good. It adheres really, really well. It does smell a little bit, so you might need to air out your masks once you've been using the glue. And then once your 2 base layers are sandwiched together with your elastic in between them, you want to leave that to dry. So you can, once you've carefully patted them down, you can just leave it and it will probably be fine. But you can clip, clamp, peg or squash it with either clips, clamps, pegs, or an old tea towel or a big bit of paper and some heavy books, just to give it a little bit of weight to hold it together. It just makes the glue adhere a bit better, having that weight or pressure. You can literally use pegs. You can use, depending on the size of it, you can use like hair slides or bobby pins. You can use the quilting clips you get for sewing. You can use, an old book. You can use proper desk clamps. But just keep it together. let that dry however long that the glue takes to dry. It really depends on what glue you're using, how long that takes. I usually leave it overnight. If it's a simple, we're just gluing 2 layers together, then that's totally fine. With something where you've got several different pattern pieces, you might need to glue down the base layers, wait for them to dry, and then glue on the details, and then wait for them to dry before you get to the next stage. That's best practice. I don't always do that. I just get overexcited, glue everything together, and then hope for the best. But it is better to wait for each layer to dry because it takes less time to dry. I'm usually like doing it in the evening and then leaving it to dry overnight, so it's not as big of a deal. But if you are trying to like get it done throughout a day, like say you've got a nice day off, it's a Saturday and you've got a day off from school or work and you're just going to work on it through the day. You start in the morning with the gluing and you leave it for however many hours it is, and then after lunch you do the next bit and then you leave it for however many hours that is, and then after tea you do the next bit and then you leave it overnight. It really depends on what you're doing and how much time you have. Take your time and have fun with it. If you're rushing it, you're probably going to be making more mistakes and then having to go back and fix them later. And a wee tip to remember is whenever you're using glue, you're going to really want to decant it onto something, whether that's a piece of cardboard or the lid off of a sweetie tub, or whether it's a proper painter's mixing palette, or whether it's an old plate. Whatever it is, you're probably going to want to decant the glue onto that, squeeze it out, pour it out, and then use either an old paintbrush you don't mind getting gummed up, or a palette knife, or a spatula, a specific glue spreader. If you don't have any of those things lying about, you can just like get a bit of card and use it to spread the glue. You can use your fingers, but it will be messy and you will need to wash your hands more often because it will get everywhere. It is a guarantee. I know that from past experience of getting too excited and basically just finger painting everything. Because I'm 5, apparently. But do what works for you and what you have access to. Obviously, having a reusable glue spreader or palette knife is better, but if you just have a bit of cardboard offcut, just use that. It's fine. Especially if you are putting layers on, like with the swan, or like with the frog, where there's the lips. So there's the base layer, there's the top, the chin, the lips, the nostrils, the eyes, the irises, and the eyelids. If you're waiting between layers for them to dry, a really good tip to keep any excess glue that you've got on your palette is to either take a Ziploc plastic bag and seal it in there without any air, or get some cling film and put it over. This works with paint as well. You can also buy little paint tubs that you can seal. Honestly, it's just make whatever works. If you're trying to be more environmentally friendly, then reusable is better. But if you're on a really tight budget and you've just got whatever's in your house, then use what works. You also need to remember to clean any glue spreaders or paintbrushes in between using them so that they don't get gummed up and unusable. Take care of your tools and they'll take care of you. Once all of your pattern pieces have been glued together and they've been left to dry, you then want to move on to the painting and decorating stage. You may or may not need to prime your base. With the swan, because I was keeping the felt as the colour, I did not need to prime anything. I did not need to do this painting stage. I just went straight onto the decorating part. With the jam flan, because I was layering up layers of paint over felt that was a different colour than what I was trying to make it, I first had to put down a matte red fabric paint, then I did chunky glitter, then I did thinner glitter, and I had to leave it to dry in between each layer before I did the decoration. With the toad frog, I wanted some of the felt to show through because, as I said before, it's somewhere in between the other two felt masks. It's kind of combining the techniques into one. I mixed glitter into the fabric paint when I was painting. But I made sure the felt was going to show through in some places because I wanted a kind of mottled effect. With the shark, because I was just painting the whole thing grey and I would have primed it with grey anyway, I just did slightly more layers of grey paint than I would have done. It has gotten a little bit bashed. I might need to touch it up later. It is a few years old now and I do love it so much. So because basically I would have been priming it in the colour that I was painting it, I didn't really see the need to prime it beforehand. Because yellow is a really difficult colour to just get straight onto pretty much anything, I primed this card with white first, and then I did several layers of yellow before I went over into the details. It really depends on what you're doing, whether you need to prime or not. You can prime with acrylic paint, with fabric paint, you can prime with a mixture of glue and paint, you can prime with gesso, which is a special type of primer. If you're using spray paints, you can get special spray primers. Remember to wear your mask if you're doing that. There's loads of different ways. You can mix paint, glue and water and can water it down. There's loads of ways to prime things. It really depends on what surface you're working on, how you need to prime it. And then you let that dry. Once you've primed it, you then want to paint your base, whatever the base colour is. In some cases, that's pretty much just one colour. In other cases, that's going to be each different section. You're going to have to paint them in different colours. So for both painting and priming, you're going to need to use whatever your paint palette or whatever your mixing tray is and some paintbrushes, remembering to wash them or secure them in between layers and usages. Leave each layer to dry for however long either the instructions on the art supply says, or if it doesn't say on the material itself, you can look that up online. Generally speaking, with thin layers of acrylic and fabric paint, it's going to be between 1 and 2 hours. If it's something thicker, like puffy paint or something you've mixed with glue, it could be anything from 2 to 24 hours. It really depends on what paint you're using. Most of the non-toxic paints, like the things I used for this project, the maximum drying time for them is about 6 hours. It depends on what you're working with. Always read the instructions before you begin, or if you know that it's going to dry in half an hour, then you know that you can work in half an hour increments. Very, very thin layers of acrylic on card, they might only take 30 minutes to dry. Thicker layers, 1 or 2 hours. Really depends on what you're doing. The key is just to build up thin layers of whatever you're doing. And leave it to dry in between. There's a lot of waiting time. These masks do not take very long physically to actually make. Each stage for something simple like I've been making is probably 20 to 30 minutes. So it's probably going to take you 2 or 3 hours to actually make the masks. But with long and variable drying times, that's probably going to be over 3 to 5 days. So give yourself a week. Even though it's only going to take about 3 hours, that's going to be spread out over about a week. If you're doing more complex designs, then it'll take longer. The more layers that you have to wait for to dry, the longer it's going to take. Something like the swan, it only took me about 2 hours because I didn't wait. I didn't wait for the glue to dry before I went in with the puffy paint. It's best practice to do it. There are a few places where it's kind of bled because I was impatient, but I had a limited time to make it in. It was just a quick example to teach my friend how to make bird masks for fun, so it didn't really matter. I might go back and redecorate this later, because the beauty of cosplay is once you've made something, that's not necessarily it done. You can just upgrade it every time you wear it. If that's what makes you happy and you just want to improve it a little bit at a time, or if you're working on a tight budget, you can do the most basic version of it and then save up the next time that you wear it, you can add a little bit more. And that's magic. But yeah, I made this in about an evening, so it's a little bit rougher than the ones that I took more time over. The jam flan I made in 2 evenings. Again, I wasn't taking my time with it. It was just like a quick, fun, silly project. My other masks, they took sort of between 3 and 5 days, just with all of the drying times. I'm not sure with the shark how long that took because I was making a puppet and the rest of the costume at the same time, and I made the whole thing in about a week. Just as you do to yourself. Don't do that to yourself. Take your time. Take your time. Take it slow. It'll be so much less stressful. I made both the frog and my lemon jelly together, kind of switching in between masks while the other one was drying in 4 days. Took about 3 days to do the frog. It took about 3 days to do the jelly, but I started the frog on one day and I started the jelly the day later. So it'll take you between 1 and 3 hours to make these masks, roughly. Assuming you work at the kind of similar pace to me. If you work a bit faster, it'll go a bit faster. If you work a bit slower, it'll go a bit slower. It really just depends. But take your time, give yourself a whole week to work on it, and just do a wee half an hour or an hour every evening and you'll get through it. But once your mask is dry, all the base is done, you want to go back in and decorate it. And this can be done with whatever you want, whatever craft supplies you want. I mainly have used glitter glue, puff paint, glitter, and what's that called? Permanent marker, and googly eyes. But you can use whatever you want. Once your decorations are all dry, you want to fix, varnish, or seal them in. Now you know how to